American energy independence. In short, this will improve the quality of life for Western Pennsylvanians and all Americans. I thank the gentleman, and I yield back.
Well, I thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania, and I appreciate his raising the point of the war on coal and talking about the economic benefits of coal in Pennsylvania. And I don't know if anybody noticed, but deep in that 21-page declaration of war on coal, or the climate change document, the President actually talks about another important fossil fuel that Pennsylvania is tapping into, and that's gas, in the attack on methane. So those that think perhaps natural gas will be the next great fuel to replace coal ought to think again, because as soon as they have their way shutting down every coal plant, they'll be after all the gas plants as well. We truly need an all of the above. At this time, I want to yield some time to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Reed.
Well, I thank the gentleman from North Dakota for yielding and bringing this important issue to us today to have a conversation on. I am a firm believer in the all of the above approach to our energy needs of America. And making energy in America domestically will lead to us being energy secure. It's about energy independence. It is about developing our resources, both fossil fuels on the short term and mid-term, but always keeping an eye on the alternatives and renewables for the long term, so that we create a portfolio of an all of the above that will ensure that America's national security is taken care of when it comes to our energy needs. Now, you know, I've spent a lot of time, being from New York, dealing with the issue of natural gas development and the Marcellus Shale and Utica Shale formations. And I can share with you many stories from farmers as I went through the northern tier of Pennsylvania, which is just over the border from my district in Corning, New York. And I remember one story in particular. I went to a farm, a family farm, that I was invited to go to by an individual in my district who was opposed to natural gas development. However, when I arrived at that farm, I met with her father. And I sat at her father's living room table and had a conversation about what this meant to that family farmer. And I can tell you, what I heard really resonated with me. Because what I heard was, you know, I know that my daughter is opposed to this. She's concerned about the impacts on our farm and that type of thing. But I can assure you, I've owned this farm for generations. And I'm going to make sure that my land is protected, and it's done right, and it's done safely. But what I'm also doing is I'm taking the royalty payment, the cash payment from that resource, and I'm putting her daughter through college. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen, across America. We have spent trillions of dollars on the war of poverty, of hard-working taxpayer dollars, to try to get people out of poverty, and most of the time by educating them. And here you had a gentleman who was going to use a resource that he owned, a property right that he owned, and was empowering the next generation with a college education that that individual did not have to pay for, and didn't come out of college with the $50,000, $70,000 worth of debt. That's a game changer when it comes to the war on poverty, in my opinion. And I appreciate the gentleman's comments from before, because when we talk about this issue, we also have to look at it from many different aspects. And it's not just about being an economic resource in regards to the resource itself, but being a resource that repowers America. Repowers America, as I co-chair the manufacturing caucus here in Washington, D.C., that gives us the power to start building things here in America again and selling it overseas. That's the America I want to stand for. And if we're going to melt steel, if we're going to have that industrial revolution of the 21st century that I believe we can have, we're going to need power sources to do that. And you can't melt steel, in my opinion, with just windmills and geothermal and solar panels. They have a role in our energy portfolio, but you need those fossil fuels that we have been blessed with to come online to provide the power, the utility, and the energy to do what needs to be done in order to build it here and sell it there. And so I appreciate the gentleman bringing this issue to the forefront. And one last point I will stress. as I represent the 23rd Congressional District in New York, we are going through the process of seeing 2 main coal-fired plants be shut down. And I'm hopeful, and we're doing our work in Dunkirk, New York, and in Lansing, New York, on the other side of the district, to stand for repowering those power generation facilities with natural gas as the applications are pending in Albany. But I can tell you, what I'm concerned about is if you shut down those plants, and this war on coal that just came out yesterday from the White House, if you shut down those plants, my taxpayers that I care about in Dunkirk, in Tompkins County and Lansing are going to see their real property tax bill go up anywhere from 50 to 60%. Those are hard-working Americans that are already under the burden of a tax burden that comes out of Washington, D.C. by way of income taxes, but there's also tax burdens in our states. And one of those primary tax burdens is a real property tax bill. I'm hearing from seniors, I'm hearing from people across the district just say, Tom, I can't afford it anymore. And you shut down a power plant, and you take away that tax base for my people, the remaining taxpayers, who most of the time have been there for generations, will see their tax bill, their real property tax bill, go up 60%. That's thousands of dollars. And in this day and age, when people are struggling, why would we commit ourselves as a nation to a policy that would put a higher burden on their back? I don't get it. I think we should have an open conversation about doing all of the above, recognize where those energy sources are in the portfolios, and then we join hands, we come together, and we develop that comprehensive energy policy that we say, this is good for America, both short-term, mid-term, and long-term, and let's get it done. And that's where us, on this side, beg our colleagues on the other side to join us in this effort. And we want to do it safely. We want to do it responsibly. We respect our environment. But we're going to do it in a common sense, looking at it from the perspective of hardworking taxpayers of America, not through the lens of bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. And with that, I yield back my time to the good man from North Dakota, and I appreciate the leadership that you have exhibited on these issues.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your stories. I think they illustrate so beautifully the importance of an all-the-above energy policy that keeps prices low. And you know, one of the things I thought about as you were talking about jobs and the impact, this cascading impact of this war on coal and war on fossil fuels. There's a survey every year that's taken by Area Development Magazine. It's called Site Selector Survey, and it asks site selectors, what are the characteristics, what are the factors that you look at when making a determination of where to put a manufacturing facility or some other business? When I was an economic development director 15 years ago, the cost of available energy was somewhere between 15th and 20th on the list. It's moved up to the top 5. Our competitive advantage in the global marketplace rests with our ability to keep energy costs low. And with that, I yield time to the gentleman from South Carolina who's provided real leadership on some of the issues that we're going to be taking up this week, Mr. Duncan.
Thank you so much. I've stood on the floor many times in my short service in the United States Congress to talk about this very topic, and that's American energy independence. And we hear terms like all of the above energy approach and energy policy. I like to think about all American energy policy, where we utilize American resources to meet our energy needs in this country. And one thing I'll applaud the House Republicans and specifically the House Energy Action Team of focusing on are 3 things: jobs, energy security, and national security. And they go hand in hand. By pursuing an all-American energy policy, we're putting Americans to work, whether you're talking about building the Keystone Pipeline or talking about offshore drilling. Putting Americans to work is what's important. And I think about North Dakota and an energy-driven economy in North Dakota, your great state. And when they give you a job when you get off an airplane up there, whether you need one or not, that's how many jobs they have available. If you're looking for work, America, go to North Dakota. But let me tell you, that's a microcosm of what we could be in this great nation if we truly pursued an energy policy utilizing American resources, putting Americans to work. And that's really what it's about, and that's one thing that I think the House Energy Action Team is focused on. The second thing is energy security. Lessening our dependence on foreign sources of energy. utilizing the resources that we have in this country. God bless the United States of America with the resources that we have here, both oil, natural gas, and coal. We heard just this week that the Obama administration is going to wage a war on coal. Not that they haven't already been waging a war on coal, but I think they're waging a war on American energy independence. Because by utilizing the resources that we have in this country, we could lessen our dependence on foreign sources and make certain parts of the world that seem hostile to American interests not so important. So American energy independence is the second thing, and then the third thing segues right into that, and that's national security. In fact, I think it was Admiral Mullen that said, you can't have, there is no national security without energy security. Think about that for a minute. Energy security means that we do have national security, that we can meet our energy needs, not to drive our economy and the engines of our economy, but also fuel the engines of our United States defense. Putting those airplanes in the air and the ships on the oceans and the tanks on the desert or in the forest, that takes energy. And if we can meet our needs through American resources, then we do have true American energy independence. An all-American energy strategy is the right thing for this country. And so just this week, we're going to take up two very, very important bills. One of them deals with opening up all the outer continental shelf areas that are currently off limits under the Obama administration moratorium. The moratorium that George Bush lifted, he said, you know what, we need to be energy independent. We're going to lift the moratorium for offshore drilling, and we're going to open up those areas for more utilization. And so we're going to do that off the coast of my state, South Carolina and Virginia and other places. We're going to go after those resources that we believe to be there. We're going to allow exploration. We're going to allow production. And we're also going to allow revenue sharing back to those states whose economies are struggling now, just like the U.S. economy, when we're $17 trillion in debt. But our state economies are struggling as well. But we can utilize and bring back revenue to the state through revenue sharing. An example is Wyoming gets $1 billion a year in revenue sharing from production on federal lands. The Gulf Coast states get revenue back to those states. South Carolina would love to benefit from that as well. And the second thing, and I'll end with this, is a bill that I have on the floor that I authored that would implement an agreement that was signed by the Obama administration. Hillary Clinton, Secretary Clinton at the time, entered into this agreement with Foreign Minister Espinosa with Mexico that said, you know what, we have a maritime border, a border between the United States and Mexico, out in the Gulf of Mexico, in the waters, a maritime border, and guess what? There are resources underneath that border. Who owns those? Do Mexico own those resources? Do we own those resources? They're shared resources. So they entered in this agreement, said we're going to go after those in the Western Gap, not over near Cuba, but closer to the western side of the Gulf. We're going to go after those resources, and we're going to allow exploration of those resources, production of those resources, and we're going to share those revenues with each country because we are co-owners of those resources. They got this one right with this agreement, and we're going to implement that because we waited a year on Ken Salazar with the Department of Interior to send us the implementing language so that we can go forward with a lease sale in that area of the Western Gap. But he failed to do that. And so we took the bull by the horns in the United States Congress, and we authored this legislation and said, we think this is important to American energy security. We think this is important to national security, and we're going to work with our southern neighbor in Mexico, and we're going to develop those resources in that transboundary area with a hydrocarbon agreement, and we're going to go forward with implementing that. That's what this bill does. America understands that we've got the resources. America understands we can work with Mexico and safely, soundly harvest those resources using American safety standards and regulation standards. It's the right thing for America, and that's H.R. 1613. I look forward to the passage of that, and I thank the gentleman from North Dakota for his leadership on House Energy Action Team, and I yield back my time.
Well, and I thank the gentleman for his leadership today and his leadership on this important legislation coming out of the Natural Resources Committee. I would like to speak specifically to some more economic opportunity as illustrated from my home state of North Dakota, just to get a sense of it. North Dakota's gross domestic product increased from $34 billion in 2011 to $38.7 billion in 2012. That's a 13.4% increase, representing the most significant growth of any state in the country last year. Texas is second with a growth rate of 4.8%, where the national average during the same time was 2.5%. So it can happen. It happened in my state because the vast majority of the oil and gas in North Dakota is not under federal land. The vast majority, like over 90%, is under private land, where the only landowner is the guy that farms and ranches the land, the person whose sustainability demands good stewardship. And we can show the way and how to do it around the country as well as offshore if you just unleash American ingenuity. I suspect that my good friend from Kentucky, Mr. Barr, might have a thing or two to say about this week's declaration of war on coal, and so I'll yield some time to the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Barr.
I thank the gentleman, and I appreciate the opportunity to address the President's climate action plan that he unveiled yesterday, and what this really means to my fellow Kentuckians and my fellow Americans all around this country. As you see from the exhibit right here, this is the quote from the President's climate advisor. Quote, "A war on coal is exactly what's needed." While Kentuckians and Americans all around this country are suffering from high unemployment, thanks in large part due to the 5,700 coal jobs lost over the past 2 years, yesterday the President of the United States redeclared the war on coal. We know that a year ago, the President, through his new source performance standards regulation, imposed an effective moratorium on coal-fired power plants coming online in the future. Yesterday, the President said that he wants to apply that moratorium to the existing coal-fired fleet. Mr. Speaker, my fellow Americans, the President's climate action plan reveals a leader of our country who is woefully out of touch with the economic realities facing the American working family. Unemployment is still at 7.6% across this country. 5 consecutive years of unemployment higher than 7.5%. 5 years in a row where the workforce participation rate, where the percentage of Americans who are of working age population are actually in the workforce is only 58%. 58% of all working age people in this country have jobs. That's all. That's 5% below the historic average of 63%. And that number has stayed stubbornly static for the last 5 years. 12 million Americans struggling to find work. Wages falling for 5 consecutive years. 3/4 of Americans' paychecks are insufficient to get them by each and every week. They're living paycheck to paycheck. And what does this President do? He declares a war not just on coal, but the working families of America. And worse, he's doing it by making an end run around Congress. His own Democrat-controlled Congress in 2009 refused to pass his radical energy rationing scheme, cap and trade, through legislation. And so now this President says, well, Congress doesn't matter. And so I'm going to impose this on the American people through bureaucrats in the executive branch. Mr. President, you are not king. The Congress of the United States is the law-making body, and the unaccountable, unelected bureaucrats in the executive branch cannot do this without proper statutory authorization. That's why we need the REINS Act. That's why we need to rein in burdensome regulations. That's why we need to make sure that unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats in the executive branch don't seek to impose by fiat a regulatory apparatus that commands and controls the American energy future. This is a question about American energy freedom, a top-down command and control approach versus American energy diversity. The President wants to impose energy rationing, and we say, let the American people decide what their energy sources should be. Half of all energy production in the United States in 2008 came from coal. 90% of all electricity in my home state of Kentucky comes from coal. In 2012, however, only 37% of our electricity comes from coal. And this president wants to take that number down to 0%. So when the president's climate advisor says that he wants a war on coal, he means it. And this is what I want to conclude with. This is not just about statistics about coal jobs lost or energy freedom or the fact that we've lost 9 power units, coal-fired power units in Kentucky in the last several years. This is about human beings. This is about people who have lost their jobs. This is about the President of the United States attacking a way of life. And President Obama and his administration display a stunning lack of compassion. Not once in his remarks yesterday did we hear any recognition, any understanding of the suffering the administration's new proposals will inflict in the communities of Central Appalachia, in the suffering of the communities that have already endured a disproportionate share of pain during the last few years. The President's Climate Action Plan substitutes numbers and theories for flesh and blood. It presents climate change as a perpetual crisis, justifying one regulation on top of another without any consideration of the cost to real people. How much is enough, Mr. President? Where does it all end? By the Obama administration's own admission, U.S. carbon emissions fell to the lowest level in 2 decades. The President of all people should read this statistic and conclude it's time for some breathing room, time to let the coal industry adjust, time to let people recover. But you don't offer breathing room in a war. In yesterday's New York Times, the White House climate advisor said a war on coal is exactly what we need. But this isn't just a war on an entire American industry. It's a war on coal miners and their families. And these coal miners, the 5,700 coal miners who have lost their jobs in eastern Kentucky over the last 4 years under this administration, they depend on those paychecks. Their families depend on those paychecks. They don't have the political clout to attract this president's attention or concern, but they are Americans. What a dramatic shift from a half-century ago, when Presidents Kennedy and Johnson focused so much energy on alleviating poverty in the very same mountain counties the Obama administration is now ravaging with these heartless policies. Mr. President, if you truly care about people, come to eastern Kentucky. See what happens when 70,000 per year jobs disappear overnight because of unaccountable bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. At least give us some consideration of that. And better yet, start working with the coal industry to address climate change concerns and stop trying to kill it. It's time this administration put people ahead of its radical ideology. I yield back.
Well, thank you. I thank the gentleman from Kentucky for his good leadership on this important topic of the importance of coal as a major player in our energy fleet. If I could just for a second, Mr. Speaker, inquire about the balance of time available in the hour.
24 minutes.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I appreciate the gentleman from Kentucky's speaking to the issue of coal because, like oil and gas, coal is also important to North Dakota. It's an industry that's been around for decades. In fact, we really learned about energy development in North Dakota on coal. We have about 17, a little better than 17,000 folks that are employed either directly in the coal industry or in one of the service industries that service the coal industry. It contributes about $3.5 billion to our state's economy. That's a lot in our little state. We've been mining coal for decades. We've been mining 30 million tons a year for decades, and we use that coal right in North Dakota, burning it to generate electricity at 7 power plants in our state, and we generate some of the lowest priced electricity in the country. Again, getting to the issue of affordable energy, very important in terms of our competitiveness in the global marketplace. So it's not just about the jobs, as important as those are, high-paid jobs, I might add, but it's also about the competitive edge it gives us with with the lower cost electricity. But in North Dakota, under our beautiful prairies, there's an 800-year supply of coal. To wage war on it today and leave 800 years worth of a product that provides wealth and jobs and opportunities and low-cost electricity in the ground makes no sense whatsoever. And with that, I want to yield some time to my neighbor and good friend who knows a fair bit about the energy industry himself. In fact, I have to admit the Bakken was actually discovered in the state of Montana. I recognize Mr. Daines.
Thank you very much, and I'm grateful for my good friend from North Dakota, Kevin Kramer, for this time, talking about what's really important to the people out in the heartland, which sometimes is a very different set of values from what we find right here in the Beltway of Washington. And I was also struck by my good friend from Kentucky, Andy Barr, as he shared his comments. It reminds me that we are the party, we are the leaders back here standing for the working middle class in this country, standing for jobs, for revenues that go to our schools, in the tax base, for low-cost energy. This president says one thing, but the consequences of his policy is something that will only ultimately benefit the elite and the wealthy in this country instead of the regular working families of this country. And I want to thank my friends here today for organizing this special order and bringing attention to the importance of America's energy sector to our economy and to the daily lives of all Americans. And in Montana, we know the importance of a robust energy sector, whether it's oil, gas, coal, wind, water, biomass. It's all needed to create jobs and keep energy costs low for the people of our country. In fact, one of my priorities in Congress is to fight for the all-of-the-above energy plan that helps grow American jobs, lower energy costs, and help us fight for North American energy independence, energy security. Unfortunately, President Obama does not seem to share this goal. In fact, yesterday, when President Obama unveiled his latest energy plan, a job-killing agenda that will hurt American jobs and American families and small businesses. After his announcement yesterday, President Obama made a commitment to waging war on American energy. That was made crystal clear with his announcement yesterday. In fact, by imposing further barriers to the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline and working to severely hinder American coal production, President Obama has unveiled a misguided agenda that will only hurt Montana and American energy consumers and cost good-paying Montana jobs. Montana's energy sector is a huge driver to our state's economy. In fact, our coal mining industry employs over 1,200 workers across our state. Montana contains more coal reserves than any other state in America and ranks number 6 overall in coal production nationwide. Additionally, coal production provides critical funding for Montana schools, as much of our state's coal is located in school trust lands. We forget about the contributions to our tax base and helping build schools and fund teachers, which comes from the energy industry. Development of our coal reserves produces millions, let me say that again, millions of dollars for Montana public education every year. My daughter is a senior at Montana State University, preparing to graduate and go into elementary education in Montana. Energy production is critical to funding our schools, our public schools in Montana, as we look down the road. We've also seen tremendous growth from the booming development of the Bakken Formation, as my friend from North Dakota alluded to, which spreads across eastern Montana and into western North Dakota. Oil production in our state has created thousands of good-paying jobs, both in the oil fields and also in the service industries that are at the heart of many of our small towns. I would like to have the President come out to eastern Montana and see what's happening out there. Families are struggling, living month to month, and seeing the benefits now of the energy industry as they're now seeing a paycheck they can count on looking forward. It's injected millions of dollars into our state's economy, and like coal, has helped provide millions of dollars in much-needed funding for Montana schools. Recent reports show that Bakken oil production currently accounts for 11% of the total U.S. oil production and accounts for 40% of increased oil production nationwide. And if the Keystone XL pipeline is built, it would be able to move up to 100,000 barrels of oil. That's Montana and North Dakota oil per day from our very own Bakken Formation. Mr. President, I'm in favor for Made in America energy. Montana's natural resources, like coal and oil, not only provide our state and nation with quality American energy, they are helping keep the utility costs low for hardworking American taxpayers. Montana gets more than half its power from coal. That helps keep electric rates low. We see some electric cars driving down the highways today in our towns, and I'm not opposed to electric cars, but if the truth be known, we ought to have a sticker on the back that says, "This electric car likely powered by coal." The average retail price in Montana is currently 8.4 cents per kilowatt hour, among the lowest in the nation. The construction of the Keystone XL pipeline, on the other hand, would also have a tremendous impact on energy prices for Montanans. In fact, not too long ago, I was traveling around our state. I'm the only member of Congress for the state of Montana. It's a privilege to represent an entire state. I was up in Glasgow, Montana, meeting with the Norval Electric Co-op. I learned that the Norval Electric Co-op is expected to supply power for one of the Keystone pump stations. If the Keystone pipeline is built, it will help Norval keep their customers' electric rates stable for the next 10 years. Think about that, 10 years of no increase. Contrast that to if the pipeline is not built, Norval expects that their rates will grow upwards of 40% over the next decade. Mr. President, these customers at Norval live month to month. They live paycheck to paycheck. This is what's helping American middle-class, hardworking taxpayers survive, is by expanding our energy production. By declaring a war on energy right now, you're declaring a war on American families who are struggling every month to make ends meet. For most Montanans who live on tight budgets, unlike a lot of the folks around here in Washington, D.C., and Montanans who track and where their paycheck is going, a 40% increase in utility rates would be devastating. Unfortunately, under President Obama's agenda, that's very well that could happen. President Obama's war on coal would severely hinder coal production in Montana and the jobs that rely on this important industry. It would be a serious blow to Montana families and small businesses who rely on coal as a reliable source for affordable electricity. And just as bad, this job-killing agenda will be imposed through unilateral action, demonstrating that the President is more set on achieving his own political goals rather than listening to the will of the American people or working to create much-needed jobs. Mr. President, the people of America are focused on paying their bills every month. That's a higher priority to them than your priority, and that is winning an election in 2014. By sidestepping Congress and public scrutiny, President Obama will set his agenda in motion through costly new regulations and more red tape and bureaucratic hoops. These roadblocks won't just hurt the coal industry, as we know President Obama and his advisors seek to do. These regulations will hurt hard-working American taxpayers who rely on American energy each and every day. Let me be clear. President Obama's agenda isn't just a war on coal. This is a war on Montana energy, on Montana families, on Montana small businesses and Montana jobs, and it must be stopped. I will remain steadfast in this fight to stop the President's job-killing agenda, and I look forward to working with my colleagues here today on common-sense policies that grow American energy and help create the good-paying jobs that the American people desperately need. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman for his comments, and I especially appreciate your reference to the Keystone Pipeline and the importance to the rural electric cooperatives. You know, a lot of people forget that there is a Keystone Pipeline. There is actually one sited and built with very little fanfare. I was, at that time, a member of the North Dakota Public Service Commission, carried the pipeline portfolio and sited the first 220 miles in the United States of the original Keystone Pipeline. It didn't go anywhere near the Bakken, unfortunately, but it did cross 600 landowners' land, green field all the way, 2 scenic rivers. We put a lot of restrictions on it, but it was with very little fanfare. In fact, every landowner willingly signed the contract. There wasn't a single inch of that pipeline in North Dakota that had to be condemned to be built. And it was interesting because we have, I think, 5 or 6 pumping stations in North Dakota on the original Keystone, and the co-ops were all sort of sort of arguing about whose territory would it be in, because every pumping station was a load equivalent to a city of 10,000 people. That's big time for the people of North Dakota and the people of the United States, for those who argue that it's not about the United States, the Keystone XL. It is about the United States, so I appreciate you raising that issue. Another state that has a lot to lose in the war on coal and a lot to gain by more offshore drilling is Virginia, and I recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak this afternoon on these important issues. You know, it's true that offshore in Virginia is something we've been discussing since 2004, and what's interesting is a lot of the folks who said, well, you don't really want to do that, 2004, it's not going to really help gas prices. You know why? Because it'll take 7 to 10 years to get it developed. Well, guess what? If we'd have started in 2004 drilling off the coast of Virginia, we'd be getting that natural gas and we'd be getting that oil off the coast of Virginia right now, and it would be creating jobs, it would be creating tax dollars that could go to schools, roads, you name it, whatever the legislature in Virginia decided they wanted to spend it on, it could be going to increase the revenues of the United States of America as well. And likewise, this Congress could then be debating the expenditure of those funds and what we wanted to do with those monies. But instead, the naysayers keep saying, well, not now, not now. And I say to them, if not now, when? When are we going to do this? We know it's out there. We know it's a huge resource for the United States of America. And then yesterday, on top of blocking our ability to get from the other side of the state the natural gas and the oil that is there and that we know is there and that we want to get to, the President of the United States declared what I call the war on coal Phase 2. Now, he's already been involved in Phase 1 for some time, but in his comments yesterday, he made it clear that he's not going to wait for science to get us a solution, because it's coming. The research that's being done on chemical looping and other ways to use coal cleanly, where you end up with coal ash and carbon dioxide. No SOx, no NOx, no mercury, coal ash and carbon dioxide. And you can recycle the iron pellets that they use. I mean, it's really a wonderful process. But we have testing left to do on it. It's already been working at Ohio State University. They're building a facility in Alabama. They're going to be doing testing beginning later this year, that'll end next year on a bigger project than what they did at Ohio State, but still it's got another phase to go even after that. But if we wait just a few years and we do reasonable things now and we wait for science to catch up, we can in fact accomplish what the President wants to accomplish on the environment and not destroy the jobs of Southwest Virginia, the Central Appalachian region, all other coal-producing states. There's more than 20 of them that are coal-producing states, and we will be damaging their economies if we go forward. Now, it's interesting, the President noted in his speech, he said, now what you'll hear from the special interest in their allies in Congress is that this will kill jobs and crush the economy. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's exactly what you'll hear, and you know why you're going to hear it? Because it's true. And if being a special interest means you have to be one of the people that lost their job in the coal fields of Southwest Virginia or Kentucky or West Virginia or any of the other states where jobs we've been losing them monthly, we get reports, another 25 here, another 15 there, people who've been laid off in the coal fields. And it's not just the coal fields. It's the railroads that haul the coal. And it's the people at the manufacturing centers that make the equipment for the mines. And it's the car dealerships that used to sell cars to the miners who used to have jobs. And let me make something clear, folks. Being in the mine is a hard job. There's no question about it. We want to make sure health concerns are taken into consideration because it does have dangers to it. There's no question about that. But the workers in those mines are making somewhere between $75,000 and $95,000 a year if you add in their benefits. Now, you take a district like mine, the 9th District of Virginia, where the average household income is around $36,000 a year, and you start laying off 15 $75,000 to $95,000 a year jobs here with health insurance included, you lay off another 25 jobs here and 30 jobs there. And ladies and gentlemen, you want to talk about destroying the economy? You darn right you're going to destroy the economy. And if standing up for the special interests of the people who work in the mines, the people who work at the equipment factories, the people who work at the car dealerships, the people who work at the restaurants in Southwest Virginia is a bad thing, then I guess I'll just keep doing a bad thing, because I will continue to fight for Southwest Virginia and the jobs in the coal fields. Now, you know, the other thing the President went on later to say was, he said, you know, this issue didn't used to be partisan, now it's partisan. Well, guess what? The President's wrong. This is a bipartisan issue. And I'm going to look at the Bluefield Daily Telegraph and read you some quotes from some of my Democrat colleagues, because it's important for the people of America to know that the President may want to divide, but in the coal fields, we understand exactly what this is going to do to our jobs and to our economy, and ultimately to the economy of the United States of America. U.S. Representative Nick Rahall, Democrat, West Virginia, said Obama's climate change plan is misguided and could cost millions of jobs. Now, that's not a Republican, that's a Democrat. He goes on, the misguided, misinformed, and untenable policy that the President put forth this afternoon puts at risk the energy security of America and the jobs of millions of our citizens. Rahall said, locking away the fuels that power our nation behind ideologically imposed barriers will drive up costs for nearly every business and manner of industrial activity while driving jobs overseas. Households already struggling to make ends meet will see energy bills skyrocket. That's Nick Rahall, Democrat of West Virginia. He goes on to say that the administration should be advocating new clean coal technologies as opposed to crippling regulations. But isn't that really where the President has been going the whole time? I mean, isn't that where he's going? He said in the San Francisco Chronicle interview 1/17/08, when I was asked earlier about the issue of coal, you know, under a plan of cap-and-trade system, electricity rates would necessarily skyrocket. Nick Rahall, households already struggling to make ends meet will see energy bills skyrocket. The President's doing what he said he was going to do. He declared war on coal, and now he's going to try to see if he can't finish it by devastating the American economy and the economy of Southwest Virginia and Central Appalachia. It's just not right. Mr. President, let's look at the science that your administration has invested money into. Chemical looping may be the way that we can both have what we want. I want, and my colleagues want, jobs for America, tax dollars coming in off of coal severance, natural gas, offshore drilling. We want to see those tax revenues coming in, because then we can use that to help Americans. We want to help all Americans. You want to clean up the environment, so do we. We can do it, but we have to be reasonable. And let's go forward and look at another Democrat, and that would be Senator Joe Manchin, and he touches on this point in his comments in the Bluefield paper. U.S. Senator Joe Manchin, Democrat, West Virginia, said Obama's plan will have disastrous consequences for not only the coal industry, but also American jobs in the economy. Democrat Manchin goes on, the regulations the President wants to force on coal are not feasible, and if it's not feasible, it's not reasonable. It's clear now that the President has declared a war on coal. It's simply unacceptable that one of the key elements of his climate change proposal places regulations on coal that are completely impossible to meet with existing technology. The fact is clear. Our own Energy Department reports that our country will get 37% of our energy from coal until the year 2040. Removing coal from our energy mix will have a disastrous consequence for our recovering economy. These policies, these are the words of Senator Manchin, Democrat, West Virginia, these policies punish American businesses by putting them at a competitive disadvantage with our global competitors. And those competitors burn 7/8 of the world's coal, and they're not going to stop using coal anytime soon. It's only common sense to use our domestic resources, and that includes our coal. And Senator Manchin is absolutely right, because let me tell you, when we burn coal here and we create jobs here in the United States of America, as you well know, that means we're not sending those manufacturing jobs overseas to a country, you know, particularly if they're in Asia or in some of the emerging economies. They don't have anywhere near the regulations that we have. They don't have the regulations we had in the year 2000 or the year 2005 to comply with. So we can create the goods here, create jobs for Americans, create tax dollars which will help us deal with the national's debt and deficit problem. We can do all that here, and we can do it by burning coal more efficiently and cleaner than the countries that we're competing with. But instead the President wants to ignore all that. He wants to ignore those facts and go forward and say, no, 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 we can't do that. And I go on with the quotes from the San Francisco Chronicle. He says, we did the skyrocket, and he goes on to say after that, even regardless of what I say about whether coal is good or bad, because I'm capping greenhouse gases, coal power plants. Now listen to this. There's a comma here, but listen to this, because right now he's not singing the same tune. Because I'm capping greenhouse gases, comma, coal power plants, comma, you know, natural gas, you name it, whatever the plants were, whatever the industry was, they would have to retrofit their operations. That will cost money. They will pass that money on to consumers. Who are the consumers? Who are the consumers? I believe the consumers are the average family out there. The single parent trying to raise children, the elderly, the folks trying to struggle with that $36,000 a year annual household income, the miners and the workers in the factories that produce the goods that help the miners do their job, who now don't have jobs. They're still going to have that electric bill coming in. And you know, it's interesting, the President actually cut in his budget proposal the LIHEAP money, which is the program to help the people who can't afford to pay their heat bill. So at the same time that we're creating more unemployment, we're also going to take some of the benefit away that helps those folks. It just doesn't make sense. The President's policies don't make sense. And I submit to you all that the President needs to rethink this. He needs to look at clean coal technology, because that's the winner for America, for American jobs, for American prosperity, and for America to go forward into the future, leading the way. And I yield back to my friend and colleague.
Thank you so very much for your insights and your experience in this very important industry of coal and all of the things that it supports and that support it. And I think that an appropriate way to sort of wrap this discussion up is to remind folks that while we are advocates for energy development, domestic energy development, American energy production that creates a competitive global advantage in all areas, we are not also good stewards of the environment. Let me just close with this. These counties in North Dakota that have 7 power plants burning coal all got A ratings from the American Lung Association. And I believe that the same God that created the beauty and splendor of the oceans and the mountains and the prairies and the topsoil put the minerals underneath it. And we ought to use all of them for our benefit. And I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Members are reminded to address their remarks to the Chair. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2013, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. O'Rourke, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak about a place that is very near and dear to my heart, a place that is the source of great beauty, the source of millions of jobs for this country, an economic driver not just for the region that I represent, not just the state in which my district resides, but for this entire country and, for that matter, this hemisphere. I'm here today to speak about the U.S.-Mexico border. And I have the privilege and honor of serving with other members who represent significant sections of the U.S. side of the U.S.-Mexico border. We're joined today by Susan Davis from California, Pete Gallego from Texas, and Philemon Vela, who is also from Texas. But before I yield to them, I want to talk a little bit about my special section of the U.S.-Mexico border in El Paso, Texas. El Paso is home to more than 800,000 people who, along with the citizens of Ciudad Juarez, form one of the largest binational communities anywhere in the world. El Paso has for decades served as the Ellis Island for Mexico and much of Latin America. Literally millions of immigrants who are now U.S. citizens, who are productive members of our communities, have passed through the ports of entry in the district that I have the honor of representing. And beyond that, and beyond the human dimension of what the border produces, the beauty, the wonder, the creativity, the culture that develops from there, the border also is an important part of who we are as a country in our past. It's one of the most essential places anywhere in the United States today, as seen by the debate that is taking place in the Senate. And it is the future of this country, whether you look at it demographically, whether you look at it economically, whether you look at it culturally or by any other measure, the border is absolutely critical to the United States. I want to talk about a couple of aspects that help to define this critical place that the border holds for this country. And I thought I would start with trade. There are more than 6 million jobs here in the United States that are dependent on the trade that crosses our ports of entry at our southern land ports between the United States and Mexico. More than 100,000 of those jobs are in the district that I represent in El Paso, Texas. The state of Texas itself has 400,000 jobs that depend on this trade. More than $300 billion a year flow between our two countries. Mexico is the second largest export market for the United States. We are the largest export market for Mexico. And a critical aspect of the trade that comes into the United States from Mexico that's very important to remember is that unlike any other trading partner that we have, more than 40% of the value of the trade that comes north from Mexico originated in the United States. So we are literally producing together even those things that are imported into the United States from Mexico. Again, Mexico is the source of jobs. It's the source of so many things that are positive to our economy, to our culture, and to our communities, and all of that comes to a head at the U.S.-Mexico border. Now, if you're listening to the debate that's taking place right now about comprehensive immigration reform and some of the provisions that have passed out of the Senate and some of the commentary that you read in the newspapers or the talking heads that you see on TV, you might not know that. You might instead see the U.S.-Mexico border as a source of anxiety, as a threat to this country's security and its future, as something to be feared, to be locked down, to be secured, and to be forgotten. We're here to tell you today that the facts and the truth and the reality could not be further from the current debate that you're hearing on the public airwaves today. In fact, the community I represent, El Paso, Texas, is the safest city in the United States, bar none. It was the safest city last year in the United States and the year before that. In fact, for the last 10 years, El Paso, Texas has been among the 5 safest cities anywhere in the United States. But El Paso is not alone for its security along the U.S.-Mexico border. San Diego is the second safest city in the United States. Laredo recently ranked as one of the top safest cities of any city in the United States. In fact, if you're on the U.S. side of the U.S.-Mexico border, chances are you're safer there than you could be anywhere else in the country. And these benefits do not just accrue to El Paso, to Texas, and to the borderlands. There are jobs, tens of thousands of jobs, hundreds of thousands of jobs in states throughout the country, billions of dollars of economic growth related to our trade with Mexico, not just in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and California, but Montana, Florida, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan. Again, it's important to emphasize that even that trade coming north from Mexico in many cases originated in these other states that are not border states. So one of the messages that we hope that carries from today is that regardless of whether you are in El Paso, Texas, and understand the border inherently, or if you're in Detroit, Michigan, you have a vested interest in a healthy border. A healthy border equals a healthy U.S. economy. That equals more jobs, more economic growth, and more positive factors for the U.S. going forward. So with that introduction of what it is that we hope to cover today, I now want to yield to Pete Gallego, who by land mass represents almost a quarter of the state of Texas, someone who has served in the state legislature, someone who lives and understands the border and can speak to the positive dynamics that we see there. I now yield to Pete Gallego, such time as he may consume.
Thank Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague, Congressman O'Rourke, my fellow West Texan, with whom I share the privilege of representing El Paso County, for yielding to me this time to talk about some issues that are critical to the border. And I have to say, Mr. Speaker, that I don't want to use any incendiary rhetoric. I don't want to use any flashy words, because frankly, I think that the people of this country elected the members of Congress not to cheerlead or use harsh rhetoric or add fuel to fires, but to solve problems. So I'd like to talk about some of the challenges that, in real terms, this Congress has the opportunity to make a difference on. The 23rd Congressional District, which I have the privilege of representing, runs some 800 miles along the Texas-Mexico border. It includes 5 ports of entry: Eagle Pass, Del Rio, Presidio, Fabens, and Zaragoza Isleta in El Paso. No other congressional district shares a larger border with Mexico. The district is both rural and urban, and frankly, it looks like what the rest of Texas will soon look like, because it is evenly split between Democrats and Republicans. Because this district has the largest border with Mexico, the policy discussion about border security, about immigration reform, these conversations greatly impact the 23rd District. Frankly, they impact the entire state of Texas. The passage or failure of immigration reform will profoundly affect us all. In Texas, there are approximately 1.7 million unauthorized immigrants, comprising 6.7% of the state's population. According to a 2006 report from the Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts, who was a Republican officeholder at the time, she indicated in her report the absence of the estimated 1.4 million undocumented immigrants in Texas in fiscal year 2005 would have been a loss to our gross state product of $17.7 billion. Well, as public servants, as I indicated early on, the weight of our words is rather heavy. I've asked the Comptroller to provide, the current Comptroller, to provide an updated study to shed some light on the true impact, the current impact that our state has as a result of these undocumented immigrants. The study would ensure that all 38 members of Congress from Texas and everyone else can have adequate information during what is a very important policy debate. A more recent study from the Immigration Policy Center noted that if all unauthorized immigrants were removed from Texas, the state would lose $69.3 billion in economic activity. The state would also lose $30.8 billion in gross state product and approximately 403,174 jobs, even accounting for adequate market adjustment time. Well, after more than 2 decades, I am very encouraged that comprehensive immigration reform is clearing hurdles in the Senate. I'm hoping that our colleagues in the House will take it up as well as soon as possible. Make no mistake, the legislation that's in the Senate, it's not what I would have drafted. Those of us on the border know that what we need are more Customs and Border Protection agents at our ports of entry. Many jobs in Texas, much of our economy, in fact, is inextricably linked to international trade. In fact, more than 50 million Americans work for companies that engage in international trade. That comes to us from the U.S. Department of the Treasury. Trade with Mexico represents one of our biggest economic drivers and pumps billions of dollars into our economy every day. Every day, think of this, $1 billion in cross-border commerce happens between the U.S. and Mexico. That equates to some $45 million in commerce per hour. Staffing increases at our ports would decrease wait times at our ports of entry, would increase security, and would lead to more effective screening and entry for those who are traveling, as well as for imports that are coming into the United States. It is those long lines at our ports of entry that hinder economic development and harm our economy. Yes, it is true. No one will argue that our nation's doorways must be secure, and that our trade and our commerce along the border, on which many small and large businesses depend, must be allowed to move efficiently. And I'm hopeful that as debate on the immigration issue continues, as we continue our conversations, that we can increase the staffing at CBP, a policy move that does, in all truth, make sense for Texas. But as far as the fence is concerned, the border fence, in a time of tight budgets, I have to say that I'm very perplexed as to why Congress would spend so much money on an ineffective project. You'd be hard-pressed to find too many Texans, particularly those who live and work or have been raised along the border, who support the notion of a fence. Let me give you a couple of examples and a couple of quotes. The idea that you're going to build a wall from Brownsville to El Paso is just, it's ridiculous on its face. That quote comes from the governor of Texas, Rick Perry, just last year. How about this quote? The border fence is a 19th century solution to a 21st century problem. That quote comes to us from Senator John Cornyn of Texas in 2006. As I've said, I'm opposed to the notion of a border fence and would rather that we shore up our ports to speed up commerce. A fence isn't something that those of us who represent the border support, but we understand that it is important to bring families out of the shadows. Economically, here is what comprehensive immigration reform means to those of us along the border and elsewhere, to each and every one of us. It means that our deficits will decrease while GDP, productivity, investment, and employment will increase. Our country will save over $1 trillion, or about $1 trillion, over the next 2 decades. More than 10 million people will pay $459 billion just in income and payroll taxes during the first 10 years. And over that decade, we will reduce the federal deficit by $197 billion and will add more than $200 billion into the Social Security Trust Fund. The decade after that, comprehensive immigration reform will reduce the federal deficit by $700 billion. In Texas, all the key players are standing steadfast for immigration reform. It's supported by the Chambers of Commerce. It's supported by the Texas Farm Bureau. It's supported by labor. And it's supported by public opinion in our state because it makes economic sense. My paternal grandfather worked cattle and founded a small family restaurant that launched our family into the middle class. My maternal grandfather built fences across the hardscrabble landscape of far west Texas. And today, I have the privilege of representing the 23rd District in Congress. In this nation, our values teach us that families stick together and that hard work, not circumstances, should shape our future. It really is a country of opportunity. Our nation becomes stronger as more people pledge allegiance to our flag and commit themselves fully to our nation and to our economy. I'm hopeful that we can move quickly on this very important policy matter that greatly impacts not only the 23rd District, but the entire state of Texas and, frankly, our country as a whole. Immigration reform is right, the time is right, and Texans are counting on us. It is significant. If you've ever been in the Texas Capitol, years ago, our forefathers and foremothers who built that beautiful pink granite building faced the front door in a certain direction. Our front door of the state capitol doesn't face north towards Washington. Our front door faces south towards Mexico. The front door to our nation, as Governor Richards used to refer to it, is a very important doorway for trade, for commerce. It's historically significant not only for Texas, but for the rest of our country. Again, immigration reform is right for Texas, it's right for America, and it's something that this Congress should make sure happens as soon as possible. With that, again, Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to Congressman O'Rourke for yielding me this time, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I want to thank Representative Gallego for his very eloquent support of moving forward with comprehensive immigration reform and doing so in a rational, fact-based manner. And I think he would agree with me that we are very pleased to see progress being made in the Senate, whether it was originally with the group of 8 or the 60 or more senators who have since joined them in key supportive votes to move this forward. I'm happy that we're making progress. What concerns me are some of the provisions that specifically relate to the U.S.-Mexico border. You're talking about 600 miles of border fencing and walls that currently exist being expanded to more than 1,400 miles of the 2,000-mile border. You're talking about a Border Patrol force that today is more than 20,000, which is more than double what it was in 2001.